On Ticker, this is Import Export with Lawrence Christophels.
Hi, Ron. Thanks for joining us again. We've got a fantastic show. You've just heard from Albertson Uso from State Transport. And this is actually quite an important topic. So we want to talk about data security and how that impacts and how it's increasingly impacting global supply chains. So to discuss that and to join me, it's Steve Kelly, the Managing Director from Starboard IT. Thanks for joining me, Steve.
Morning, Lawrence. How are you?
Great, thank you. Steve, you and I have discussed this before, but I think that with my experience in logistics, supply chain and trade, in the past, when you get RFQs and RFPs coming through from some companies who say, look, we want to choose service providers, you've got obviously your normal rate cards and services and KPIs, and then over the last few years they put in things like contingency or disaster recovery plans, DRPs and things like that. But over the last sort of 2 years, I've really seen an evolution of data security and how, as part of an RFQ, that they're saying, well, we want you to demonstrate that you can manage our data before we even consider you as part of this RFQ process. So, I know that Starboard, you guys have just recently been accredited with the ISO 27001. So I wanted to ask you, for the viewers, could you explain what 27001 is, the ISO accreditation?
Yeah, ISO 27001 is about information security and especially around data. So data has become, I suppose, the new gold or the new oil, as some people call it, throughout all businesses. And protecting that data asset, is becoming increasingly important. As far as ISO 27001, it's a very holistic view of data security. So it's not just about the technology that wraps around, the security technology that wraps around that data. It's about your work practices and everything that is involved in your business's operation from end to end.
Yeah.
Because at any one point in time, its data security is only as strong as the weakest link.
Yeah.
And so having that holistic view is very, very important.
Yeah. And I think, again, the mistake or common mistake that I see, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the smaller businesses are equally as vulnerable as the big businesses, because, as you say, it's the weakest link is typically in-house or the user themselves.
Yeah, no one's safe anymore. So the people are targeting any organisation they can to get in through either email spam or phishing, or through trying to break through their firewalls or whatever. It could even come from internally. So,
but what do they do with the data? I mean, I know there's some blackmail sort of stories. Are they real stories? Is that like literally happens?
For sure, yeah. I've got several of our clients have been hit by the ransomware, where they ask for Bitcoin to unlock the data, and once they pay that Bitcoin, they ask for more Bitcoin. So it's never ending, and they never get their data back. So definitely they earn money through that. You just have to look at the big companies like Google and Amazon, who are looking for data through acquisitions such as WhatsApp and other companies, where they get more and more data about you, so they can actually use that data in more legit circumstances. But data can be used in many, many different ways.
Yeah. So I think whether it's business or consumers, the trade-off between convenience, remote access, versus security how do you manage that balance? Because obviously everyone wants to be able to sit at a coffee shop and have a coffee and do work or go home. And
working remote doesn't mean you're insecure. So there's techniques and ways to have that as a secure means of working, because that's just common practice now in every working from home, working from the coffee shop is very common. So there are very easy ways to make that secure.
Yeah.
Okay. So that shouldn't be a concern.
Yeah, and that's one of the areas. I mean, obviously the ransomware you mentioned. Are there other, serious type of threats that are typical happening around the world at the moment?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is spoofing of emails is probably the thing I see more frequently than not. Is they look like they're Microsoft, or they look like they're coming from the managing director of your company. They might be asking for, hey, Joe, I'm in a meeting, can you just run out and get some Apple or some voucher cards, and please get $700 worth. And it looks legit, comes from the managing director's email account, or looks like that, and it's not. So you've got to really be vigilant about how you look at the email, where it's from, and assess whether it's actually for real or not before you go and spend that money, because you won't get it back.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And you've reminded me of another case study I've heard, which actually could have been from yourself, around people the CFO its CFO email asking to release a payment when it wasn't even their email.
Yeah.
So and that was a significant payment. So those sort of things are happening, and obviously there's the ability to crack into those networks, those email sites are becoming more prevalent.
They're becoming more. They're getting cleverer and cleverer.
Yeah.
The ways that they come about. So what we do in my company is we send out almost weekly just updates to our staff to what to look out for in an email, what to look out for when you're on certain websites, and it just builds an awareness through the whole organisation.
The culture, yeah.
Yes,
and
that's what it's about. I think
yeah.
most of the threats are humans. Humans are generally the weakest link because systems. We can make them as fairly strong these days, but the weakest link, unfortunately, is the human.
And this is the thing with supply chain, Steve, is that there's so many stakeholders along that journey, right through from manufacturing to transport to packaging, even shipping, distribution.
Yep.
There's so many stakeholders who are touching that one piece of product. That also means they're touching the data, and that data is increasingly more elaborate, so more consumer data, where they live and what time they're going to be home, and mobile phone numbers. Those are really critical pieces of data that can have significant impacts.
That's right, and also it's quite the levels of education throughout the organisation as well varies. Also, some staff are touching data, but they haven't got access to company emails. They might be working in a factory floor, so there's certain challenges with trade and logistics that present themselves a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's why I've seen so many with these RFQs that come through, is that number one on the list now is disaster recovery, as we talked about. Show us what your cyber security plans are and what your processes and systems are around that. Because if you can't demonstrate that first key criteria, then sorry, we're not interested in talking to you about an RFQ.
It goes beyond that as well. I'm noticing that some insurance companies are now using the same sort of questioning on their insurances. So a little bit like your house insurance, if you've got locks on the windows and you're doing the right precautions, your premium will come down.
Yeah.
But if you're doing the right things in your data security, your business insurances may also be come down as well.
So apart from that cultural awareness and sort of really getting the buy-in of all the staff in an organisation, are there any other tips and advice you'd give a company around that? Is there, is there sort of some things that you'd say, here's my sort of top 10 that I'd probably start with?
Yeah, there is. There's I think I mentioned the awareness program that we've got. So that's really easy to get on.
Yeah.
You can go to websites if you want to do it yourself, or you can come to companies like us. But one thing that's really common is when you've got leavers and joiners. So when someone leaves a company, sometimes we haven't got practices in place to actually delete people's accounts through all the different accounts they may have touch points into while they were working with the company, and that them being open for a certain amount of time leaves major vulnerabilities for organisations.
Sure.
So that's probably my top two.
Yeah, that's really, you don't think of that. Everyone's wrapped up in trying to get that position refilled and making sure the work's covered, but as you say, those accounts could be left open for a year.
Yeah, and they can be accessed anywhere, as you were talking about before. So accounts can be accessed from a coffee shop or a beach or whatever, as long as they've got access to the internet. So.
Yeah. I think the other thing I wanted to ask Steve was, looking at the data management between, again, these supply chain stakeholders, do you guys get involved with mapping out service levels agreements? So let's say I'm Albert, I'm the warehouse, and I've also worked with the client, and I say, look, Albert, we're going to hand over all our customer order details or our supplier details, but I want you to be able to sign a service level agreement to say that, we want you to manage this data in certain ways, like quarterly backups, daily backups. I don't know what criteria it may be, but are you guys getting involved with more of that?
We are, that's fairly fundamental for our business model. So we're a managed service provider. So we don't look at it just as data. We look at it as IT operations end to end, and that SLA that's wrapped around that whole piece. I think that's important to capture that all in one.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're just managing the data, I don't think that's doing it justice. You need to really wrap your hands around the whole IT operations and make sure that you've covered off all the holes, so that if you're talking about service level agreements, that you can actually meet those service level agreements each and every time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you also triggered something, a thought process there, is that again, a competitive advantage these days, if you are a service provider in the industry, is to really emphasise and shout out, look, we are really strong on our IT security. So therefore, you can actually stand out and well above any potential competitors. Say,
sure.
look, do you know what? Come and check us out. We've got this, robust data security. Here's our structures, and you can trust us with your stuff.
It's very important for us to actually practice what we preach. So that we don't want to be the builder's house, if you know what I mean. So we take that pretty seriously in our company. So
Great. And is this something that Australia, comparatively around other markets, are we on par? Or we, I know that there's some other markets that can be sometimes more advanced with us from a supply chain point of view. From data protection, data awareness, where does Australia fit? Are we?
Yeah, I think the front runners are US and Europe and some in Japan, but we're not too far behind. I think we've got good education systems here, so we know that we're probably a little bit behind, but I think we can always do better in security. But I think we're tracking okay. I can see.
I think that as again, supply chain companies, they are getting less complacent. The old "she'll be right" type mentality is diminishing, and people are becoming a lot more serious and more proactive versus reactive around the data security.
I agree with that. The "she'll be right" is sort of going away from the Australian culture a little bit, which I'm pleased with, because it does, especially when you're talking IT security, it does. That complacency can be the weakest link at times. Yeah.
Well, it can literally shut your business down overnight. If that data, we saw some government agencies on the news last year around having data breaches and the reporting requirements around that, and how to try and recapture that data, then regain that trust with their customers.
Regaining trust is a very big one. Once you've lost it, it's very hard to claw that one back. So you've got to be vigilant. Yeah,
and be proactive, as we talked about, to really make sure that you're on the front foot. Do it best for your internal staff. Work through those educational programs, and somehow bring it into that cultural aspect of the business, because people spend time on, and which is important on, obviously, health and safety, mental health, a whole range of things around the business culture, organisational culture, but they need to incorporate the data security culture of that business as well.
That's for sure.
Yeah, great. Cool. So, look, I think there's definitely are there any case studies, Steve, that you can think of that come to mind that have been a horror story that you had to sort of go in and clean up the mess?
Yes, I can share with you one customer of ours who were Apple-based, and they were of the opinion that they didn't need antivirus on their Apple machines. And
I've heard that all the time. It's like, we stick with Apple because you can't damage it.
Yeah, no, well, they had, I think one machine had like 1,300 files infected.
Wow.
But while we were cleaning the files off, the accountant called them and said, I can't access the files on the cloud. And they'd got ransomware as well. So they actually, their whole business shut down for over a week while we cleaned all their machines, did the restores. Because backups are only a point in time, they lost a lot of information from when the backup was restored until when. So it crippled their business for probably 2 weeks and put them behind probably several months. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you actually brought another point that I wanted to discuss. So forgive me, I had this on my note. I didn't get to it, but the cloud-based scenario and the evolution between cloud computing, which you guys do really well, and how companies have this sort of fear about moving information to the cloud. Is that again diminished?
That fear should be going now, because when the cloud first hit the streets, there were no real strong security practices around that. That's changed these days. So big companies like the banks and the like are moving heavily to the cloud. The governments haven't been moving to the cloud. There's some real good, robust security practices now in place for that. So people shouldn't be concerned that we've got to do it properly. So you need an IT partner that actually knows what they're doing and can get you in there and get you in there safely. Yeah,
that's what, again, people say, I'm in the cloud, I've got a Google Drive. It doesn't work that simply.
That's probably the first step, right? Just the storage. But once you get your compute in the cloud as well, that's when things start to get a little bit more interesting. So you can actually react really quickly, you can change things really quickly, you can start talking to other people within the cloud without having to, develop communication lines between two buildings and all that sort of stuff. So you can actually communicate within the cloud. So this is the true power of being truly in the cloud. Yeah.
And it sounds like it's still untapped. Like they're not really sort of ringing the towel on it yet. It sounds
exactly.
Like,
yeah, people are still cautiously, especially the bigger companies, are cautiously going into that world. And as we learn more from that, I think people and where the true value is that the smaller businesses will come up behind that with that tried true knowledge that these bigger companies have got, and they've got the big budgets to actually put some R&D in behind this to try it out. So.
Well, look, the other thing I wanted to ask there as well, Steve, is that we've got that leveling of the playing field, so to speak, when it comes to information systems, IT, and infrastructure. So an SME can pretty much do all the same stuff a big boy can now.
Yeah, if you go back 20 years, you would have had to buy a rack, you would have to buy hardware. The upfront investment for being for computing back 20 years ago was high. So now it's really OPEX. It's a monthly fee. There's no upfront charge. The cloud provider has that upfront charge. So that's the true advantage of it as well. Yeah,
great. Yeah. So I know you talked about the tips and advice for data security. Do you have similar tips and advice for cloud computing for companies?
Yeah, look, you've got to actually work out whether it's good for you or not. Just because your mates down the road are all in the cloud, I think there's a lot of people get a lot of bill shock when they move their stuff just up and move it directly into the cloud. The first monthly bill shocks them. Yeah. So you've got to do it right. You've got to actually understand the capacity that you're using in the cloud, because it is capacity or consumpon based billing. Okay, so you get charged on how much compute you've got, how much storage you've got, how much network you use. So it's all about consumption. It's not about having a presence in there. It's about the consumption.
So it's not like buying the racks and servers like they said the old days.
Yeah, if I was to talk to my mother, it's about like she's been in the cloud for ages. She uses gas and electricity and those types of services. She doesn't produce those. She just consumes those. It's very similar. It's a very simplistic view of it, but it's the same in I
like that analogy.
Cloud.
It's a utility type based solution.
It's exactly a utility.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't thought of that before, but it's a great analogy, and I'll pinch that off you if that's okay. But it's a great way to say, look, this is where the doing business is headed, because companies now need to be on the cloud and for that speed access. I think there's definitely great benefits with that, and as you say, as long as the foundation is done correctly and you're not trying to backtrack and fix things that have been incorrectly set up in the first place, then it shouldn't be a problem. Right.
So for example, you don't need a large disk space that you're going to grow into. You just, if you're looking at storage, you just basically just put it in the cloud how much you need at that time. It'll grow into that. So you're not paying for something you need in the future, you're just paying for what you need now.
Great.
I think that's the idea of getting capacity right in the cloud.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Steve. It's been awesome joining us. Again, really delighted to have you on as our inaugural part of the inaugural show with Import Export, and we will be doing a whole range of events with Starboard coming up throughout the year around the country as well. So looking forward to having you and your team talking about some more detail around that.
Sure.
But that leads me to, I just want to talk quickly about some of our, stay with us, but I want to talk to the viewers about some of our upcoming events with ATLC. So we're going to be able to meet a whole range of other experts, such as Steve and Albert before, but mingle with other importers and exporters in the flesh, rub shoulders. We've got a whole range of events coming around the country. Next week we've got the first one kicking off for February in the Auburn Hotel in Hawthorne, Victoria. That is the 6th of Feb, 6 p.m. And it's a really cool event about optimising your LinkedIn profile and updating that. So we've got one of the LinkedIn experts here in Australia, Megan Edwards. She'll be talking about how you can update your LinkedIn profile. You'll have the ticket includes drinks, snacks, but also importantly, we've got a photographer on site doing brand new corporate headshots for you as well. So you get a brand new LinkedIn profile, 2020 profile photo as well, and you'll learn how to maximise the most out of that. That will also be replicated in Sydney on the 18th of Feb at the Endeavour Tap Rooms in the Rock, so a really cool venue up there as well. You might know that spot, being from Sydney originally. And then we've also got inventory management and product lifecycle breakfast on the 12th of February here in Melbourne. So that's really important to come along to as well, and part of a really important growth factor of supply chains around how to properly manage your product lifecycle, especially around sustainability and how the packaging and all those type of disposability of your products now is so important for consumers and for you and your supply chain. So, I know that we'll have a whole range of different events through ATLC, but other industry providers through the sector here, through supply chain logistics, please send that through details. I'm more than happy to spruik your events as part of the import-export show to make sure that we're helping the community at large, be better educated and up to date with what's going on in international trade, supply chain logistics. So I believe we're about to just go to a break, and look forward to seeing you straight after this to talk to David McCready from the Australian British Chamber of Commerce. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you.
Ta.
This is Ticker, your new source for news.